afternoon.
So I'm going to get you warmed up a little bit, before Crystal and Jamila. I just want to welcome you all out, or welcome you back to the Institute for Urban and Minority Education, we call IUME, to our graduate student colloquia series. This is the last one of the academic calendar year 2012, not the last one of the academic year 2012-2013. So a little bit about the Institute. In 2013, we'll celebrate our 40th anniversary. The Institute was started by Professor Edmund in 1973, understanding a couple of issues that unfortunately are still with us today. One is the gross underachievement and undereducation of particular communities in the United States. And the second challenge is the lack of critical scholarship on those communities that shows what's possible and not just what's missing. Right, so attacking the so-called achievement gap and the deficit theorizing about particular groups was why the Institute was founded. We still continue to do a lot of that work today. As I said, unfortunately, some of the problems are still with us. What I think makes the Institute unique, and you'll see some of that today, is a dual focus on demonstration and praxis and on-the-ground work in schools and out-of-school community settings. So actually, demonstration work, working with schools, with teachers, with community organizations, and a commitment to scholarship around that activity. And you often see an institute will do one or the other. Either they'll just be focused on the scholarship without that intervention component, or they'll do the intervention and not the scholarship component. One of the things that we know we need to do if we're going to really transform our schools is to transform the conversation about our schools and our children. And one of the ways to do that is to produce a different kind of information. And that's what I see in this cohort of graduate students. I was thinking about, in California we have brave new voices, right? And it's a group of poets. But I think IUME has its own brave new voices. And those are the graduate students that are doing a different kind of scholarship, a scholarship of praxis, which I think is not only field defining, it's field transforming. And two of our exemplars of this unifying praxis and research practice are Jamila and Crystal. Both of them second-year doctoral students in our English education program, second-year graduate fellows of the Institute, doing amazing work. They're students of mine. I could not be prouder of each of them and what they have brought over the past 3 semesters. You'll hear more about that today. Their work fits into our larger focus. Crystal will be talking about literacy and black masculinity, and one of the key focal groups of work at the Institute, African American males who are largely lagging behind in almost every positive indicator of academic success. Jamila brings a variety of interests in spoken word and digital literacies and work with youth in hybrid spaces in school and out of school, which is another major focus as we try to not see youth as deficits, but if you want to see them for what they have, you have to look at the multiple ways that they're being literate in the world. And Jamila is kind of connecting these digital literacies to advocacy and humanizing pedagogies, and that's talk about that work. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Jamila and Crystal. They will speak, open it up for Q&A, and then we'll have some dessert after.
That was really nice. I feel really touched. Okay, so his words don't fit with the curriculum sometimes, because he be writing rhymes for reparations and slinging street metaphors to open lyrically locked public school doors. Lost and found literatures make him lost and found in between the lines like crack valves in concrete. But nobody speaks when the teacher talks, and nobody moves when the principal walks into the room. Disciplined and invisible classrooms dictate diaspora trades of bodies and minds, brains and mirrors, black and bruised, blue and used up like old chattel on salty shores, where tourists take pictures to remember the slaughter. Click, 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 click. But now the slaughter are today's children, and parents send them to school hoping to fend off deficit models and standardized lies, while the demise of little black boys are encouraged via detention that eventually becomes detention centers, centering their histories of mediocrity. Do you hear me? My brothers never finished high school, two brilliant minds defined by who's bad. Except their futures weren't as bright as Michael Jackson, and there were cells, not classrooms, waiting for their arrival. My mother was in denial that some way, somehow, her lessons didn't stick, and the tricks of urban realities proved to be sharper than her tongue. Her sons were the sun, but the industry of urban schooling, equipped with metal detectors, proved to be brighter and stronger, producing longer effects of what it means to be a black man trapped within white supremacist patriarchal systems that systematized before they recognized he was a good kid. He is a good kid. And now there is me, sifting through books and theories to set my brothers free, while I be looking at the masculine from a feminist gaze, trying to understand the haze cloud in public education, steadily accepting that it was my academic indoctrination that made me a success and not a statistic, and my use of cultural capitals made me culturally accepted superficially, so now I'm free, right? I know how to use APA citations, and I seek grants for the liberation to write these words when I choose, so therefore I'm free, right? Free to decipher why my brothers quote Dolomite while I quote Dostoevsky. Free to understand why my brother's decision to dye his hair was also the same reason for him to get beat down by other boys. Free to understand that my brothers and me still ain't free.
I am from a gash the size of the diaspora. We are wounds fighting to remember our skin into existence. Remembering is painful, but still we dance here in these borders with insistence. I am from Calypso. The steel pan is a phoenix of an instrument born from the ashes of slavery in my parents' land, from frying pans, dustbins, and oil drums. You see, where I'm from, everything broken is beautiful if you give it a reason to survive. Where I'm from is alive, and it is loud, and it is proud. I am from mangoes, roti, roast baked, fried chicken and fish cake, candy yams and fried baked, collard greens and dal pari, quarter waters and bhaji, nawalators, icy, saltfish, palau and pumpsy tape all day, every day. Utica, Utica, like she a run me down, run me down, run me down. I am from the pride of culture, but I am also from a scar of shame. Where I'm from, our identities are noosed by the histories in our own last names. We dance in our gashes, and we make wings from our mother's spines. It is ugly and beautiful, hurtful and healing all at the same time. Where I'm from, all 6 floors of my building call the woman in apartment 10B Granny. I am not from a broken family, but I am from a broken promise. We are from a gash the size of a diaspora, open and gruesome and honest. We want to thank you all so much for taking the time out of your lives, especially at this point in the semester, to come here to be with us today. And we want to especially thank the Institute of Urban and Minority Education, everyone that constitutes this space. It's a very powerful space. All of you, we love you so much. Dr. Morel, Veronica, thank you so much for your leadership and for giving us this platform. Crystal, she said to me, she said, let the pregnant lady go first. That's what she said to me. So Crystal's going to take this call. I can't argue with that. What was I going to say? So
I gotta use my words.
exactly. So Crystal's going to start off, and then I'll come in, and then we'll open it up for Q&A.
Okay, so I'm gonna just, if one of these, if this light can go out.
Yeah, they can go down.
Cool.
Okay, so the name of my talk is called By Any Means Necessary, Black Masculinity and Literary Freedom. And just to let you know, kind of, let me look at this. I don't need to sit down, I'm not that bad. Just to kind of let you guys know what inspired this talk. A lot of different things, which I discuss in my poem, but I'm one of 3 children, I'm the only girl, and I have 2 older brothers, and what happened in their lives or what happened in my life in school was drastically different. And so over the years, I've been reflecting a lot on why our schooling experiences were so different coming from the same home and the same family values. And so, this image right here is from a book cover called From Jim Crow to Jay-Z, Race, Rap, and the Performance of Masculinity by Miles White. It was published in 2011, and it really helped frame some of my ideas about what Black masculinity is and the performance of it and how that's tied to issues of patriarchy, etc. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, and I just kind of love the cover. Then I have an image of Barack Obama because he's kind of central to what I'm going to talk about in a few. And then I have the image of Malcolm X because Malcolm X is connected to the study that I did with students around issues of race and identity and this idea of manhood and masculinity. So first I want to talk about just examining the word. I'm going to talk with you because that's just kind of my style. I'm not really going to talk at you. So I'm going to, if I ask you guys a question, just feel free to chime in. So just looking at the word masculinity, you hear the word mask, right? This idea of a mask. So just a question that I want to throw out there is, what do you think this mask is and what is it hiding when you think of the word masculinity? Strength? Okay. Vulnerability.
Insecurity.
Insecurity. So we have strength, vulnerability, and insecurity. And interestingly enough, I'm going to touch on all of those words. So I've just kind of been thinking about the word and what it means. So I want to get into this idea of masculinity as a performance, and which is connected to social constructs. And there's another book by Anthony Linnell Jr. called Black Masculinity and Sexual Politics, which was published in 2009. And this kind of really helped me understand the connections between Black masculinity and sexuality, and how that is connected to issues of heteronormativity in our society, and our portrayal of what manhood is. And normally that's connected to heteronormativity and being heterosexual, etc. So in this book, Anthony says that masculinity refers to the socially constructed characteristics that society expects for the male sex. And so when you think of that definition, notice it says the male sex, not necessarily gender, right? So the male sex. And so how do we really move away from social constructs? Can we? This is a question that I keep asking myself, right? Obviously, being human, there are certain social constructs that we buy into that kind of impacts the different identities that we have. And so I've been trying to figure out how do we get away from social constructs so that we can construct who we are on our own, if that's even possible. So I love essential questions. So some of the questions that I actually use a lot in the classroom and in my own research is, what does it mean to be a man? What does that mean? Who defines manhood in this society? And how does the concept of masculinity vary across race and class? So what I've been noticing is in different communities, with regard to race and class, ideas of what masculinity is very prevalent. However, there's still this kind of universal understanding of what a good man is or what a good man looks like. So there's a quote that really stood out to me in the text. Major social institutions manage the domination of the Black males. The basic 4 cultural institutions are military, jails, organized athletics, and the entertainment industry. In each case, masculinity is an image of machismo spectacle. In each role, expectations for Black males are to produce a particular brand of masculinity, which goes back to producing a brand of masculinity, goes back to these performances. But one thing that's missing in this quote for me, I was like, what about schools, right? How could this quote not have schools in there, right? I thought schools, to me, that starts first. I mean, it starts in the family, obviously, first, right? You learn, there are different gender roles in the family, so to me, that's the first kind of lesson, the community. But if you're talking about social institutions, what about schools? So a question that I had is, how do our schools manage the domination of Black males? And throughout my years as a high school English teacher, one of the things that I noticed is the black boys were always in detention. The black boys always were, had to stay after school. And it was just this very prevalent, the bad boys, or they were labeled bad, or they were labeled that they didn't want to learn. And I always kind of connected that to my brothers and how, they were always labeled bad and not wanting to learn. So with that said, so there are two men who are kind of central to how I want to give this talk. And it's Barack Obama and 50 Cent, also known as Curtis Jackson. And I have them on for a few reasons. So first, we look at Barack Obama, and I intentionally have him with Michelle Obama. I love her, by the way. I just want to point that out before I start. But now for the analysis. When we hear about Barack Obama, everyone talks about he just loves his wife so much. It's so beautiful. Oh my God. And you always hear these kind of gushing stories about how in love they are. This kind of very, heteronormative narrative in the media and by a lot of people that I know and things that I hear and see on social networks. And, he went to an Ivy League school, he went to Harvard, he's successful, he's the first black president. And so he's talked about in these in very particular essentialized ways of like, he's the ideal black man, and this is unheard of, right? That's kind of the implication, that he's a rarity. And it always troubles me, right? It always troubles me how he is depicted. And then you have an image of 50 Cent, who, he's portrayed as very hyper-masculine, hypersexual, he was shot at 9 times, he survived. His first album, which I believe is a hip-hop classic, I'm just saying, so he's seen as this kind of tough guy, but at the same time, he's very complicated, but he's still very essentialized in the media as the tough black man. He's the hypersexual black man, and somebody like Barack Obama is the good guy, the smart guy, the intellectual, right? So how do these very essentialized notions of who black men are, as portrayed in the media, affect how our boys see themselves? What if they don't see themselves in either of these men, right? Then what happens? And so when I did this research, which was in 2008, Barack Obama was elected for the first time, and 50 Cent was very popular. He was more popular then than he is now. So I just want to show you a very short clip of an awesome documentary called Barack and Curtis, Manhood, Power, and Respect. And this was created by blackpublicmedia.org. It's a 10-minute video, but I'm only going to show you about 2.5 minutes. And I actually use this with my students, and they really had a great response to this video. So I'm going to share.
In our community, the black community, masculinity is associated with how many women you have, how many kids you have, how many times you've been in and out of prison.
You could not look at him and say that being intelligent was a contradiction to being black and male.
There is a bit of 50 and a Barack in every black man.
50 Cent had no chance of winning in the realm of hip-hop.
Hip-hop, movies, all sorts of other things have been active in the process of making that image the dominant image of black men in the United States.
Barack equaled Harvard. Someone like 50 Cent equaled Hood. Hood equaled virility. Harvard equaled impotence. And it made me think about the way manhood had evolved in terms of blackness over a period of time and how dangerous it had become. Gangster rap had begun to shape the definition of black manhood to the degree that it made, certainly I think, middle-class men lose their place in manhood in the eyes of women. Not in a real sense, but in terms of the media image, because everywhere you went, the image of manhood in every form of creative media came out of that 50 Cent mold. If it wasn't thugged out, then it wasn't manhood. And for too many of the young boys, both here in the US and certainly in London, there aren't those male figures, so then all they have to define manhood is what comes out of the small screen or what comes out of a magazine or what comes out of a hip-hop video. The beauty of the presence and the emergence of Barack Obama isn't Barack Obama, it's Michelle Obama. Because in Michelle, for black women, there was an affirmation of their strength could still find them a great guy.
We as white men who very seldom have any real relationships with anybody who's not white, particularly black men, right, believe that black men are what we see in the movie. We believe black men are 50 Cent. 50 Cent is a man who controls people by fear. This is a man that we are all supposed to be afraid of. 50 Cent will come up in here and shoot all of us, take all the valuables in the house, take whatever money we have on us, credit cards, cell phones, all of that, right? This is how 50 Cent makes his living. Black gangster masculinity does the work of white supremacist patriarchal capitalism. All it requires, in order for you to be promised that you'll get rich, is that you're willing to verbally commit black-on-black murder, control black female bodies, all in the name of getting paid. The black gangster masculine figure employs the exact same logic as the people who started the slave trade.
I think 50 Cent represents a brand of black masculinity that dates back to the old post-slavery era. During the slavery era, the stereotypes of black men were that we were happy-go-lucky, mostly lazy individuals who really needed the benign tutelage of the slave institution. After slavery, in order to justify the physical violence that would be required to prevent us from exercising our rights, that stereotype changed into the lawless, dangerous buck. That was the idea that was placed on black men. It's almost like a template that they shaded in and said, this is what black men will be now. Barack Obama is exploding the very facile and simple notions we have of what it means to be a black man in this society, whose intellect is one of the foremost things that you will notice about him, who is the antithesis of the angry, out-of-control Negro. When we look at someone like 50 Cent and we read the background, someone born into a drug-connected family, fatherlessness, loss of his mother at a young age, being involved in the drug racket himself, we don't anticipate that being someone who can figure out a way to maneuver through the corporate machinations of the music industry and then take that into advertising, brand marketing, and all the things that he's done. And so it's almost a kind of underdog vitality that you see in both of them, because neither of them, by any reasonable stretch, is supposed to be in the position that they're in now.
Barack Obama has what Duke Ellington had.
Okay. So as you can see, even the way that Jelani Cobb kind of talks about Barack versus 50, he still talks in this very essentialized way of who they're supposed to be versus who they are, right? Which is, how do we complicate that? So when we go into the classroom and we see a young black boy who we may feel, is acting up or being bad, all these terms that are used in school buildings, how do we kind of trouble what's really going on, right? Maybe the student is not, engaged with the lesson because maybe the lesson is not that good, right? Maybe the school is making him feel like he is in a box, right? Maybe he feels like, you know what, you expect me to give you this performance, so I'm going to give it to you, right? And, Jelani Cobb said something. He said Barack Obama is the antithesis of the angry black man. Is he? So, just think about that. So, when I was teaching in 2008, I had to really think of a text that I felt my students would identify with because I was given a curriculum that was scripted, and it was a nightmare. And so at that point, I was feeling very disillusioned in my teaching, and I was very angry every day, and I hated the school that I was at. And I just said, you know what, I'm not going to teach it anymore. And I had read my contract. I knew they couldn't fire me, really, if I didn't teach this curriculum. And I said, you know what, they can write me up, but I'm not doing anything wrong, I'm still teaching. So I said, what book can I use to really get to the students? And so I thought for a while, and then I came up with the autobiography of Malcolm X, not only because I love the text personally, but because I feel like Malcolm X has little Barack and a little Curtis in him. He was this major public intellectual. He had this life of hustling beforehand that was actually very sophisticated, even though it was illegal. And I thought that he was a character and a central figure that students would be able to identify with. And also, I wanted to get students away from this idea of Malcolm X as just someone who was radical or just badass. They didn't really know a lot about who he was, believe it or not. So here's the curricular design and tools. The autobiography of Malcolm X was introduced using these guiding essential questions. How does one family life and community impact one's sense of self? Because the autobiography begins a lot with Malcolm X's beginnings and how he was raised. How do you think Malcolm X defined manhood before and after his time in prison, which led to very interesting conversations in my classroom? And are there any similarities between your life and Malcolm X's life? And so if you wanted to teach this, what I do is I always have 3 essential questions, and I keep them up for the entire unit, and for the entire year, so that you're always going back to these questions. This to show students that, how I answer a question today, I don't have to answer it the same way tomorrow. It's fine. The same thing with identity, right? Who I am right now, if I want to change that tomorrow, if I feel like that no longer fits with who I am, I can change that too. And I think that a lot of students feel like they can't change that they're this one person and it's fixed and they have to be that person, which is very stifling. So I also use Spike Lee's Malcolm X, the video, just for the idea of differentiation of instruction, to cater to students in a different way, not only just in text. Again, this was in a high school English class, but also using film. So students read chapters of the book and watched the film simultaneously in order to account for multiple learning styles. Additionally, daily journal entries about the themes in the text were completed before reading the text and watching the film. So every class started with a journal entry that was connected to students personally, but also connected to Malcolm X. So like one of the questions about family life, what are some things that you learned in your family? What are some things that you want to repeat from your family history? What are some things that you want to change? Why? And so we talk about that first and then get into whatever the assignment was. And they loved the movie also. So here's my classroom context. It was 2008. Barack won the presidency that year. There were 80% black boys in my high school class. And 80%, so the majority of the class happened to be black boys. They were deemed problem kids who did not care about school. My principal asked me to take a chance with these youth. That's how he phrased it. And it was another reason why I got away with writing my own curriculum, because nobody cared about these particular students, which was a gift and a curse, right? It's a curse because it's disgusting that the students were thought of as, you gotta do something with them, you're going to jail soon. That's exactly the language that was kind of used. The youngest was 13 and the oldest was 16. So as you can see, just the range of ages. There were students who were left behind before and really struggling. And having a 13-year-old in the same room as a 16-year-old is very difficult. It's a huge change. It's a huge change in behavior and social connection. They were labeled level 1s and 2s according to the ELA exam. The principal called them by these numbers in the hallway. He was like 2, you're 2, you're 1, you're 4. And so they had internalized that these numbers were who they were. So my goal was to get them away from identifying themselves as a number, which is very similar to prison, right? Identifying with this number. So here were my actions and interventions for the classroom. We did an introductory survey on race and identity. At this time, I didn't call it masculinity. It's not until I really went back to the work and I said, there is masculinity here because most of the class were boys and we were reading Malcolm X, so we're talking about manhood. Yeah, this is what it was. That's what I love about research, right? You go back, you're like, oh, I didn't even know that. So students discussed how they felt about themselves racially and how their communities impacted their understanding of themselves. There was a lot of deficit language in terms of how they spoke about themselves, which I thought was interesting because they were so intelligent and so talented, but every time it was like, what do you think about yourself? It was something negative. So they had internalized that there wasn't anything good about who they were. I also allowed them to do student interviews. They got to interview each other. I let them come up with their own kind of survey questions, and I'll show you what the survey looks like. And students had the opportunity to contribute to every lesson by saying what they thought would make it better, what they wanted to learn, via the parking lot. So some teachers may know this, but a parking lot is like a space in your classroom where you have students, they can put up notes about what they enjoyed about the lesson, what they didn't like, or what they want to learn. And so we use that a lot during this unit. I'm a big fan of student-centered learning. So for the survey, this question, how do you feel when you read a text that is a reflection of your race or identity? The blue represents African American students. Most of the students, about 65% of them are African American. And the other 15% were Latino, Latina. And as you can see, extremely motivated was like pretty much the answer, that they felt really motivated when they read a text that they could identify with. And a lot of them said, we have never really read texts about us. And these were ninth graders, you know, which was very scary and shocking to me. So here was a survey. Some of the questions were, you know, how do you identify yourself? On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you think your race affects your academic success? Which was a very interesting question about the answers that came from there. And I'm not sharing those responses just because, just for ethical reasons, you know, I'm just not there yet. They were some very personal things. What kind of student are you? And in terms of the New York City Standard Scale, what have you been classified as? And I asked this question intentionally because a lot of them said, I'm a number 2. And how does a number make you feel? How many people do you know in your family or in your community who have gone to college, and does that motivate you? And that was kind of trying to get me to think about the future. And so this was really powerful. Some of the responses I received, and it really shaped how I chose to teach a unit. And so part of it was self-affirmation, self-esteem, but also, you know, helping build up their skills in reading and writing. So pre and post reading Malcolm X. So pre, attendance in class was poor. Students were tired of the standardized testing curriculum. My class score average was 68%. Before. Post, students were motivated. They were coming to class more frequently. My class score average rose to 84% during the 3-month unit, just by using this text and like having them facilitate everything. Boys were more accepting of one another, and there was more classroom community and bonding as a result. As I told you, there was a lot of tension between the boys, especially with the age differences. And while they were reading this text, there was a huge change in even how they spoke to each other. They became more protective of each other. One of the things that I really was trying to get away from was, you know, this saying no homo, which was just driving me insane, you know, or that's gay, you know. And that did not totally end by the end of the unit, I'm not gonna lie. But they were conscious of it more. Because I would say, why do you have to say that? You know, because you gave him a hug, you have to say no homo, right? Why can't you give him a hug? You know, so just trying to complicate these things. So conclusions. Allowing my students to openly discuss race, identity, and manhood and its impact on their lives really helped boost their self-esteem in the classroom. I noticed a dramatic change in their academic as well as social behavior before, during, and after the reading of the autobiography of Malcolm X. Engaging material in the novel, such as poverty, hustling, segregation, and religion in X's various communities throughout his life, allowed my students to feel a connection to the text. And again, I just want to say with that point, I'm not saying that students should only read texts that are reflections of themselves. But what I'm saying is, it needs to be infused in the curriculum, right? I'm not making the argument that they shouldn't read any other text, but I'm making the argument that texts like this should not be, you know, you did it in February, right? Differentiating instruction in the English classroom through the use of autobiography, film, journal writing, and peer surveys allow the learning to be student-centered. I have to put this in yellow. Black boys can and want to learn. I want to say that. Because, you know, a lot of the dialogue in schools is they don't want to learn. They don't like school. Things like that. Despite the deficit models that say otherwise, educators need to learn who their students are by allowing them to feel welcomed and loved in the classroom, which may sound very simple, but it's real, you know. How do we allow a lot of young black boys to feel welcomed in school? School should not feel like, you know, I'm walking into this prison, I gotta go to a metal detector, how do we kind of try to change that and reframe that? And so to end, I just want to I'm just going to wrap up now. I just want to show you some pictures because you've heard it. I just want to show you some faces of some kids that I just loved, and they were in the class. So this was Capri, and he was doing work that day. I'm proud of him. And he was a 16-year-old, and he was the writer and lyricist. And him and I really struggled a lot together. And I was trying to get him to get over the fact that he was 16, going on 17 in 9th grade. That was very hard for him. But he was just a really remarkable student, and he really changed my life. And then these are the boys reading, and that's Capri again, but he's covering his face. He's like, I don't take a picture. But we were reading Walter D. Myers, which is another book that I use, which they also really love, which for issues of Black masculinity, especially with youth, I do recommend Walter D. Myers. And then this was David, the journalist. He was so loud all the time, and I loved him. You know, you knew when he was coming, and he always had a story, and he always had gossip. And he really pushed other students to really kind of rethink how they saw themselves. And this was Manny, the comedian, who he was always labeled a bad kid because he was always making jokes. And I'm like, how can we allow him to just make his jokes and be comfortable, right? Okay, let's let him make his jokes, you know? So I let him make his jokes within reason, right? Homeroom, you know, sometimes in the lesson. But I really loved having him in the class because he knew how to calm everyone down. Then there was Jeffrey the gentleman, you know, he was a nice guy. He would open everyone, pull out people's chairs, hang up people's coats in homeroom. He's a really great student. And then we went to see the movie. As you can see, nobody's smiling in the picture because that's not manly, But we did go see a movie together, and we took the C train. It was a long day, but we had a good time. And then this is just feeling cool in the classroom, just hanging out, And that's the end. So now Jamila is going to present her work, which I'm very excited to learn more about. And she's wonderful and dynamic, as you already know. So Jamila, take it away. Thank you so much, Crystal, for working with another also amazing and dynamic and really inspires me in the work that I do. I really appreciate you and the sacrifices that you make. I really There's a tenet, one of the most important tenets in hip hop is authenticity. Dr. Chris Edmund was giving a talk not too long ago, and he spoke about just some of the words, the slang that comes up within the hip hop community, just that demonstrate this commitment to authenticity. You might hear kids like back in the day, like, why you sweating me? Why you you gotta do your thing. And now you might hear young people say, you're not about that life. You're not about this life. Like, don't stop fronting, stop faking. There's all these things. So for me, in keeping with that tradition, my work is rooted in personal narrative and my personal inquiry. So everything that I'm asking, that I'm seeking, my academic journey is rooted in questions that I have about myself and my context. As a human, but also as an academic activist, as just someone that is trying to figure out how to make a unique intervention in the world. And so, for me, that comes out of, that blends with my background in literary analysis. How many of you have had any form of literature or even poetry that really stood out to you in your life, that really, can you name a few that you really resonate with?
Son of the Spirit.
Yeah.
Poem about my heart.
Nice. Wait, you got it.
Maya
Angelou? Yeah. Yeah.
Pablo Neruda.
Nice. For me, Beloved was a very powerful text. And not at first, because when I first was introduced to it through the movie as a child, I was traumatized, just traumatized. I didn't know what was going on. I really had nightmares. I cried. It was terrible. I didn't know what was going on. But then, as I
when I got older, and I actually, went into the text and read it, and I read it in a collaborative way with other students, and started to unpack this stuff, it resonated with me in the most powerful way. And so there's this in her article about trauma narratives, using trauma narratives in the classroom. Stephanie Jones writes, humans have accumulated tremendous evidence over time, pointing to the unlimited possibilities for literature to be active in the inventing of new subjects and new subjectivities. Since readers are not able to separate neatly their identifications with literary characters from their remembered and lived experiences. And so for me, this was my relationship with the book Beloved. If you know anything about the text is hinged on this very gruesome image set in early post-Bellum America in the South of a mother who, upon seeing her former slave masters coming, killed her children and was about to kill herself, was in the process of killing her children herself so that they wouldn't have to experience that. But it's so non-linear, the text, that it just starts with this very ugly, decontextualized image. And so the process of understanding this image is through reflection, remembering. It's a very painful process for each of the characters. And so a couple of the quotes that stood out to me in understanding what was going on with the story, one of the characters, the protagonist actually, in her reflection, she said, freeing yourself was one thing, but claiming ownership of that freed self was another. And I thought to myself, what does that mean for my life? What does that mean for me when these people in the text in post-Bellum America, with the knowledge that this country was not built for them, this space was not here for them? How does that resonate with me when I'm thinking about myself navigating academic institutions that were not built for me? Right? I have to walk around with the knowledge that in 1953 I would not have been welcome here. And that's something that does something to your psyche. It does something to you when you're thinking about what does it mean to try to find balance on a foundation that was built on exclusion, and your exclusion at that. What does it do for the way that you navigate your identity? And so the reason that this text became so much more powerful for me is because there's a matriarch in the text, Baby Suggs, and there's a lot of brokenness, there's a lot of healing, there's a lot of remembering, but then I figured something out. Toni Morrison is a genius. I don't really know how she lives in that space. It's like so deep, it's like too much for me. But I realized that it doesn't just say beloved on the cover, it says beloved. And I realized that because Baby Suggs, and I have to read this because it means so much to me, she called, in the clearing of the forest, she called all of the former slaves, and she said to them, here in this place we flesh that weeps, laughs, flesh that dances on bare feet in grass, love it hard. Yonder they do not love your flesh, they despise it. No more do they love the skin on your back. Yonder they flay it, and oh my people, they do not love your hands. Those they only use, tie, bind, chop off, and leave empty. Love your hands, love them. Raise them up and kiss them. Touch others with them. Pat them together. Stroke them on your face, because they don't love that either. This is flesh I'm talking about here. Flesh that needs to be loved. Feet that need to rest and dance. Backs that need support. Shoulders that need arms. Strong arms, I'm telling you. And oh my people out yonder, hear me. They do not love your neck unloosed and straight. So love your neck. Put a hand on it. Grace it. Stroke it and hold it up. And all your inside parts that they just as soon slap for hogs, you got to love them. The dark, dark liver, love it, love it. And the beat and beating heart, love that too. More than eyes or feet, more than your life-holding womb and your life-giving private parts. Hear me now, love your heart, for this is the prize. And in understanding this right here and seeing the whole text as rhizomatic as it is, seeing it come together in this space, I said this for me is a blueprint for how I imagine healing in my community. This for me is a blueprint for how I imagine healing for myself. What does it mean for me to exist in a contention that is at the same time whole and broken? What does it mean for me to have memories of my personal family, but then of our collective national consciousness. Like, we have a collective memory that we're kind of weird about, right? We don't really like to acknowledge the position of race and how it's affecting our institutions and our interactions. What does it mean to, in spite of all of that, call each other to the task of loving each part of ourselves back into existence, of remembering, right? Of acknowledging it boldly and standing in that space and remembering, bringing everything together. And so my background in literary analysis and this text and the way it resonated with me and my personal inquiry is like the larger framework for all of the work that I'm doing right now. So this is what I asked myself. What does it mean to claim freedom, to begin healing, to find agency within a dehumanizing context? Yes, and so I said inquiry-based learning in personal narratives. Yes, and so for me, another part of my personal story, and I know that it resonates with a lot of people also, because I have a poem about it, and people always tell me that they identify with it. So at a certain point in my academic career, a woman stopped me and told me that I sound articulate when I was speaking formal English, and she thought that she was giving me a compliment, but I was really disgusted, really I was. Because I realized that she was making a judgment about my knowledge based on the way that I was communicating, right? And I know that when I go home to my parents, and I know that when I speak with my friends, I don't speak like this. And actually, I had a problem negotiating myself like this. I'm like, what does it mean that I'm in this space and I feel like I have to speak like this right now? I feel like I'm denying a part of myself. But that's the part of myself that she sought to validate. And I made a connection. I made a connection to the way that literacy was functioning in my life and the power of literacy, because literacy we usually think of as it relates to text, but it's a matter of how we read and how we are read, right? What we bring to the text and what the text brings to us is this very interesting relationship. And so even the images in Beloved, what it means to be a black person in early postbellum America, how you are read and how you read the world, what it means for me to be in this context in an institution or in many institutions that I know people don't necessarily expect me to be in or don't expect me to sound articulate, whatever that means. Like, what does it mean for me to connect the way that I read the world and the way that I am read? How do I navigate that space, and what are the implications of that for the young people that we're working with? And so one of the things, my background in spoken word is very crucial to just everything that I am today. When I was 15 years old, I was introduced to the organization Urban Word NYC. And it's not until later that I realized, like, oh shoot, I don't really remember anything from high school. Really, I don't. But I really don't. But what I do remember is being at Urban Word. I remember leaving school to go to Urban Word for 3 hours to write. I remember being given positions of leadership and mentorship at Urban Word. I remember that, and then I realized that it set me up in a unique way in my community. I felt like I had something to say. I felt like what I said mattered, and that was very strange. Like, I felt like I could go on a stage and say something, and Urban Word is dedicated to finding larger and more unique platforms for young people to navigate their self-community and voice. And it's something that at the time, I'm just in it, I'm like, oh, this is hot, I got bars, whatever. But I didn't know what it was cultivating in me. I didn't know, I didn't even understand, but as I got older and I became a part of the staff of Urban Word and started to understand that it's founded on the principles of critical pedagogy and student-centeredness. And our voices and our concerns were I was on the youth board. Like, why do I even have that, right? Like, we were at the center of everything that was happening within this organization. I didn't start to appreciate that until I was reflecting on it. And so, so I started to think about the relationship between spoken word, and for this project, my background in spoken word, and then I started tinkering with this idea of digital literacy. Like, what is that? What is digital literacy? What does that even mean? Sounds really cool, but like, what is it? And so to jump into that, my theoretical framing, let me jump into that first, is in critical race theory, to ask questions of how we can center our counter stories. how do we find agency within these contentious spaces that I mentioned before, and how can that contention be asserted as a valid and powerful narrative in the classroom and outside of the classroom, across disciplines, right? And that's just one of the tenets that's really important to me, but there are a lot of other tenets that mean a lot to my work from critical race theory. Critical race pedagogy I use to ask how we can stay committed to individual and social transformation, right? So I'm a part of Urban Word NYC. We feel like we're progressive. We feel like we're doing all these really cool, forward-thinking projects, but no matter where you are, this place of reflection and practice is necessary, especially in spaces where you think you're being progressive, right? So that constant push to figure out, okay, how do I continue to question myself? How do I continue to reflect on the work that I'm doing and say that I'm not reifying the very same power structures that I claim to be working towards the ends of dismantling, right? Critical media studies to ask how we can work to subjectivize ourselves in an increasingly media-driven world. What does it mean to move from feeling like an object to a subject, to being a statistic that is acted upon in the world, to saying, no, I actually have a particular unique assertion here, and there's something that I have to say, and my contributions are going to be valuable. So that's what I use this to say. Multiple literacy studies, like I told you what it came out from before with that beautiful random comment from the lady, to explore the relationship between language, identity, and power. So I started reading work by Ngugi wa Thiong'o and Geneva Smitherman, right? That Ngugi wa Thiong'o, he said, the night, he's from colonial South Africa, and he wrote Decolonizing Our Minds. He said the night of the battlefield was followed by the morning of the chalk and the blackboard, right? Whereas they tried to physically subjugate us during the war, they tried to psychologically and emotionally subjugate us in the classroom. And so I'm like, how is education complicit in negotiating the way that we feel about identity and power, attacking our identities and having power structures working on us? And that takes me right into reproduction theory, right? To ask how the relationship between classes remain the same when we fail to feel like we are agents of change. And so all these class structures just say the same, and nothing is disrupting it, nothing to disrupt it, because of a lack of empowerment in the classroom and beyond that. And so those are some of the theoretical frameworks I work with. And so, like as I said, I have been looking for what is afforded to us by the intersection of spoken word and digital literacy. I know from a personal experience that spoken word is a powerful, powerful medium, right? You end up discovering things in yourself that you didn't even think that was there. It's very powerful, right? And then as I learn more about digital literacy, what does it mean to have digital tools at your disposal and to use it to respond, especially in critical media studies, to just the hypervisuals of my community as a certain way. So in Beloved, there's this gruesome image, right? This ugly image, decontextualized. And for the longest, I'm like, every time I look at the television, that's what I see. I see this ugly hypervisualization of something that has no context of what drove, why is this being framed this way, right? Why was this woman driven to the desperate act of killing her children? And it's not until you read the text that you learn that a couple of years earlier, one of the masters that came was drinking her milk, like in the barn, like she was an animal. Like, without that context, without the context, all you see is a woman killing her children, right? And so without context, I feel like there are certain images that are constantly available to our society that speaks to us. I feel like it's internalized, but then also it speaks to everyone about like what's going on in these communities, and it's ugly. So often it's so ugly, and how do we disrupt that? And so digital literacy gives you the opportunity to do that, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. I'm just saying a little bit about Urban Word. I'll tell you what Urban Word is about. Maisha Fisher, and so you know, in my work, I've been doing a lot of reading, trying to understand what research has been done on the value of spoken word as a way of asserting literacy and not a different rhetoric, a different genre, right? Validating that space. Maisha Fisher has done some amazing work around spoken word, and in her work in a spoken word space in the Bronx, she wrote, by creating an open mic atmosphere in the classroom, Joe, the facilitator, drew from traditions of out-of-school literacy spaces to demonstrate multiple ways of being literate. And so in line with the theories of multiple literacies, it's about being able to draw from those spaces that are not necessarily in the classroom, that are not necessarily traditional, that are not necessarily standard, but are powerful. And so to create a space of pluralism as opposed to hierarchy in the classroom, right? And so this is, again, a part of me trying to figure out what does it mean to find healing in these weird spaces that I spoke about earlier. And you know, in my research, I'm finding that within the genre of spoken word, there is literacy development. There are linguistic rhetorical strategies. Student testimony tells you that they find agency. They're able to say something. They're able to feel like they can do something about a situation. Identity affirmation, knowledge production, and voice. And for digital literacy, just to get a definition going, Juliana Avila and Pandya, they wrote a text called Critical Digital Literacies as Social Practice, and they wrote, and there's like a million definitions of digital literacy, by the way. We view digital literacies as those practices in which people use technological tools to engage with, respond to, and create both text-based and multimodal forms of literacy. And so with all this knowledge, the project that I created, I was tasked by Urban Word to think about this. What would it look like for this space, Urban Word, this space that has done so much? Our kids, when they go out to Brave New Voices, they're like always in the top 3, or New York, or you know, all this great stuff. What does it mean for this to exist on a virtual landscape? That's the question. That was the task at hand. How do we design a program for our young people to tap into the power of spoken word, but also the power of digital literacy? Because our youth board, again, who they spearhead pretty much everything in the organization, they're going to spearhead this project, right? So how can we create a project for them to cultivate the rhetorical skills available to them in digital literacies, and then also in spoken word literacies? And what does that intersection look like? How is it unique? Especially because this is an out-of-school space that values cultural wealth, that values tapping into different forms of literacies that are not formal, that really help to validate and increase the sense of agency in the young people. And so I found that there are definitely similar values within the genre of digital literacies. And so the question is, what goes in this space? What is afforded to us here? And so in collaboration with the Youth Board of Urban Word NYC, we created Urban Word Live. The Youth Board is comprised of like 13 young people, ages 13 to 19. 4 of them were members of the social media team. And so we created this program to try to think about how we could duplicate this physical model, like I said before, in this virtual landscape, but then also be able to duplicate it for other organizations, right? Like, so we could help them imagine what it would look like to carry out their social change in the digital world, especially because that's where the young people are, right? That was the main thing. If the young people are there, then how do we go there in a more powerful way? And so it went like this. Urban Word Live has a couple of steps to it. A young person signs up for Urban Word Live. When they sign up, the Youth Board social media team sends out writing prompts via Twitter and Facebook, right? So any kind of writing prompt, speak from the perspective of you're alone. Like write a poem from like something like really crazy. These kids there's something else. And so upon sending out the prompts, the young people have a couple of days to post their poem. And what's really dope about the poems when they post it is that they go on to participate in community edits of your piece. So a lot of young people, they want to experiment with poetry, they know that it's powerful, but they're nervous, they don't even know what to do. So they found that doing it like this, and having some seasoned urban word members be able to respond to their work, give them feedback, oh, that line was hot, oh, you should, maybe, try to some imagery here, or whatever. That was the next step in this process. So shot of that. And then you're invited to take live on-stream workshops weekly. So you're in the process of writing this piece. You're getting community edits from your peers online, and then you can come to an online workshop. And it was very interesting. So there's two parts to this. There is the youth leadership model from internally at Urban Word NYC, where our youth leaders are cultivating skills of digital literacy, where they're figuring out what does it mean to integrate media with they have to do film, they have to use social media, they're using text, all these things they're navigating, they're asking questions. But then there's also the people that are participating. So we worked in partnership with the YMCA, and they have young people that are participating. What does it mean for them to be welcomed into the space on this virtual platform? And those are some of the questions that we're negotiating now. And the YMCA also looking in like, how can we take some of our programs in this direction and be able to offer them to you? Since we have different offerings just as a community-based organization. Or they can follow us via live tweet. And then the online participants are invited to feature their work at our monthly Uptown Open Mic, along with other Urban Word workshop participants. So we wanted a space for the young people to be able to come together, to meet with the people that they've been building this online community with, to be able to share their work, and to say, just continue building in that way. Because this is like the beginning, we're hoping, of like some powerful relationships across this platform. And then one of the coolest parts is that we, at the end of each 12-week workshop, publish a digital anthology, right? So there's this article called Hanging Out, Messing Around, Geeking Out. That the whole premise of the article is that young people are hanging out in these digital spaces. How do we get them to tinker with some kind of learning path, and then like really start geeking out with whatever, because getting a citizen, like some kind of citizenship identity. Like, now I'm a poet. Now that I came to this space, I feel like I'm a poet. I'm a published poet. Right? So this is available for young people to even put on their resumes, to say, like, I'm a published poet in the Urban Word Digital Anthology. And so this is the program that we came up with, myself and the young people at Urban Word NYC, the youth board. And these are some of the questions that are coming out of this ongoing program. How does this third space function, to create opportunity for a distinct multimodal counter-narrative? What is unique about this space? Yes, spoken word functions as a counter-narrative. Digital literacy functions as a counter-narrative when young people are working to make multimodal projects in response to media images or in response to anything. But what does it mean when they overlap? How do the youth leading this project view their sense of agency, and how does this speak to the disruption of social reproduction? What rhetorical literacy skills are being cultivated in the youth leaders facilitating this inter-genre project? What is the nature of the student productions? And how do they speak to the larger discourse of their personal narratives? So the poems that they're writing with these community edits, how are they different from just another poem that they would have written somewhere else? They have this collaborative space now that they're working with these young people. What are the features of community being formed in this digital landscape? And what are the implications for literacy, empowerment, and learning? And so some of our questions are outward facing. What does it mean for young people who are engaging with the program? And some of them are inward facing. What does it mean for young people who are facilitating the program and leading the program? Like, what does it mean for their sense of leadership? And for the next steps, I'm in the process of collecting data, screenshots, as you saw some of them, they're clearer in real life. Video, we have video of the workshops, and also interviews with the participants and the young people facilitating the program. So connecting all of that to like the larger discourses of power and structure that I spoke about earlier, like for people navigate, like what does it mean with these young people? They have personal narratives where they feel like they're navigating a space that they're trying to give voice to right now. How do their productions connect to the larger discourse of those personal narratives? And youth participatory action research, alongside the youth board participants, trying to uncover what truths are available in this, and then also working in other schools to create similar models that have an intersection of genres that we can look at. And I feel like that third space offers something unique that can speak, volumes to what the questions that I have about what it means to respond to that ugly image that I spoke about in the beginning. And in terms of the call of to be loved, as far as I'm concerned, engaging these different forms of literacy is a way to bring together different pieces of these young people's vision and narrative, right? So they're being encouraged to say, like, what is it about, what do you want to see here, right? And what is it that you want to respond to, and how can urban word give voice to that? And so this is where my project is going, and I hope I can share more about it with you.
So we want to just open it up for questions. If anybody has any questions that you want to ask Jamila and I, either about the work or whatever.
I have a question for you. I know you spoke earlier about the early institutions that help to shape masculinity and identity. And you kind of glossed over family, because I know it's not the focus of this talk. But what are your thoughts on it, and on how family helps to shape or not shape or?
Yeah, I think with regard to family, it's very real, and I think the social constructs shapes how families raise their boys and their girls. And just speaking from my own, positionality, the expectations of my brothers and the expectations for me were very different when it came to like social things. But academically, it was all the same. But to me, it was those social differences, which were enforced by my mother. My mother had a very kind of patriarchal sense of being raised. That my curfew was always earlier, but my brother's wasn't. And me and my brother in the middle were a year apart. Things like that. Or when he dyed his hair, everyone saying that if you dye your hair, that means you're gay. Or just all of this dialogue in the home that I really feel shaped who my brother is today, and shapes a lot of the insecurities that he carries with him. So I do believe the family life is very powerful, and simultaneously I believe that the behavior of the family life is often dictated by those social constructs, which many people don't identify as being a construct, but as being, this is the way I am. Because maybe that's all that person knows, like my family is from the Caribbean, from Trinidad and Tobago, which is very patriarchal in a lot of ways, and very heteronormative, and very, this is how a girl should be, this is how a boy should be. So I really appreciate that question, because from what I've seen, especially in schools as a teacher, is if there was one attitude in the home, if I tried to offer something different in the classroom, it was very hard to kind of change what was already learned at home and in the community. And sometimes it felt impossible, although I know it's not.
But just a follow-up comment. That's where I was going with that. Thinking about, how families reconcile with schools, and when they converge on male masculinity, or gender identity, what it looks like. I know my experience, but I'm just wondering when they converge.
I have a question about you showed the frame of the autobiography of Malcolm X, and you were saying how Malcolm X in some ways embodies 50 Cent, and in some ways also has these characteristics that are assigned to Barack Obama. So I was just wondering if you could talk more a little bit about kind of these divergent masculinities and how you see them just existing in one body in the image of Malcolm X.
Sure. So Malcolm X, aside from being one of my favorite, black leaders of all time, just for the complexity of who he was, and just this idea that, that's why I like to use the term masculinities, plural, because I felt like he embodied like masculinities, identities. And when you look at his transformation from who he was, growing up, and then, moving to Boston, and then, becoming, Big Red, and then, and seeing, even when he hustled on the streets, he still had a lot of those characteristics of the Malcolm X he became when he was, like, in the Nation of Islam. But nobody ever makes that connection, right? It's just kind of this idea, because it's easier to look at it in a centralized way. He was bad before, and then he was good. And for me, just kind of really seeing the complexities within that who he was later on as a leader, he used a lot of his street knowledge in order to be the Malcolm X that he was. So with regard to divergent masculinities, my goal in my research is to really encourage young boys to kind of reimagine who they are or who they think they should be. And so that conversation would begin with having them define who they are. Just asking someone, well, who do you think you are? I have this activity. When you look in the mirror, what do you see? And that's the only question I asked. And it was very shocking to me, some of the answers that students wrote from that question. I see somebody named God. I see someone who's not smart. I see someone who, and young men who were clearly intelligent, clearly understood kind of the workings of their community. They understood how complicated it was being who they were, but yet they still, many of them saw themselves as this kind of very flat person or a very simple person. So I think just complicating the notion of what masculinity is and what it can be will help transform some of this thinking, right? And I like how you use the term divergent, because I think that many people do see it kind of as divergent, right? How do we push them to see it as the plurality of masculinity? I hope that answered your question.
Hi, Chris. So I really enjoyed your presentation. I want to just get your feedback. Something I've been thinking about is something that concerns me is this story of like this character, this black male character who starts off as a criminal and then all of a sudden flips it, and now he's legitimate and he's making big money. And so oftentimes, as we I guess I'm not an academic, but in the academic realm, they try to say, look at Tupac and look at Jay-Z and look at 50 Cent, look what they're doing now, as if to kind of gloss over what is it that actually gives them their cool, what actually gives them that sort of pop appeal, that these people supposedly were walking the streets, shooting people, taking advantage of women, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, and even in Marable Manning's reflection on Malcolm X, we're saying that Big Red might not have been the Big Red that he might have that he was painted to be in the autobiography of Malcolm X. So what I want to understand is like how do we actually direct our kids towards repudiating like these backgrounds? Like I just can't find anything good in selling drugs. Like I can't. It bothers me that we try to hold these people in esteem and kind of glance over what it is that gave them that pop cool. So how do we begin to direct our kids to view media critically and say, you know what, it's not good to say he's good now because this is what he did, if this is what actually draws us in. I mean, even as you talk about like 50 Cent, there's that bit of, kind of, I like him, and part of me does too. And I hate that I like that. And so how do we begin to, how should people in academia deal with that critically so that they're not kind of like, Michael like Dyson, like giving them a pass, like here Tupac, here's a pass. And how do we start getting our kids to think critically about this so that they don't think it's natural to want to reproduce these kinds of masculinity?
I think that's a really important question, and I think there are two ways. And I'll start with a story, okay? And then I'll try to get to your question. So my student Capri, he was 16. I knew he was in a gang. I knew he sold drugs. These are things that I knew. I saw him every morning selling drugs on the way to school. So if I would have told him, what you're doing is wrong, selling drugs is bad, maybe he would have never came back to school, right? So I think sometimes it's hard to separate how we may feel. I know that he may die being in a gang. I know that he may get arrested doing drugs, right? But just saying that to him that it's wrong doesn't really get to the complexity of why he's doing it in the first place. And so I think once we try to understand that there's good and bad in all of us, right? I may not be selling drugs, but I may be doing something else that needs to be fixed, right? I think that when we have that approach, that this is a very complicated situation. I was teaching in East New York, right? Which at that time had the highest homicide rate in New York City, which also had one of the highest poverty levels in New York City in comparison to the South Bronx. These were the realities that I was dealing with. So for me, it was better for me to give him a book and to have a conversation with him about, these are the things you can do if you don't want to be on the corner every morning at 6 a.m., right? Let's look at this book. Because I did not want him to feel as if I was in a hierarchical position and that I could tell him what to do. Because from what I've seen in my personal life and with my brothers, it often doesn't work. Sometimes the best intentions, with morality and all these things just doesn't work. And I think reproducing those masculinities that you're talking about, it's so much larger than the communities, right? And something in the video where the one guy said that, I don't remember his name, but he was saying that, this issue of black masculinity that's been reproduced and stereotyped and essentialized, it is connected to patriarchy, right? It is connected to heteronormativity, right? A real man knows how to make money. How am I gonna do that? A real man has money in his pocket. How am I gonna do that? What are my options, right? If I live in this neighborhood. So I think just trying to understand that there are so many layers of that. And I think once you try to, get to the heart of those layers and have really powerful conversations that accepts the good and the bad, then we can get to that transformative place, right? Because if you get me to understand why I'm selling drugs in the first place, as opposed to telling me don't sell drugs, right? Then maybe I'll begin to really analyze how I got there.
I want to respond to that also. I think it's also about the way that we look at deviance, right? One time I posted a Facebook status that became very, there was a lot of argument. And I said, the people that sagging pants on the corner, they're doing a lot less damage to the world than the people in suits and ties. But they're the ones that we're going to see on the news every day. They're the ones that we hide our purses from, right? That's a social. But I'm like, the people in suits and ties are robbing the world blind. And so it's the way that we look at deviance, because if you're the lawmaker and you create the law so that you can be you can take advantage, if you're in charge of these structures that we're talking about dismantling, then that's a different kind of evil that I don't think we cue in on enough.
I was just gonna agree with both of you, and I think one way to look at it differently instead of good and bad is to look at logics and instead of pathologics. Behavior can be logical and self-destructive, right? But there's a logic to it, and if you disacknowledge the logic, like Crystal was saying, people look at you like you don't understand, right? How do you change the logic? So Malcolm X's story can be seen as one of a consistent logic, but different opportunities, right? He made the most of what he had before he went to prison, Foundation of Islam. So if we can understand that many of the behaviors are logical, they come from a logic, we can work to change the logic instead of trying to change black boys. Because then they're allowed to bring that similar logic to increased opportunities. And that's a through line, right? It's not that they're bad and they're good, it's just that they have different opportunities. So I think both of you are doing that in your work. But the hard part is kind of changing that larger conversation, right? Because it's so easy to see them as pathological, instead of as making the most of the limited opportunities that have been presented to them.
This is sort of a question for both of you, and I really appreciate both of your presentations. And I was wondering about what you think about sort of the sort of like balance between empowering Black students to take on the dominant sort of the discourse that they'll see in their educational lives that like doesn't recognize them as like, you know, main characters in the story of like education or history, versus or in combination with trying to change that discourse itself. So I guess like as an explanation, like you're both talking about seeing how your students and how yourselves had seen like stories that really related to like, you know, Black identity, Black characters. And I feel like, and when I was teaching for a little while in a pretty much 100% Black school, I felt pretty much the same way. I was shocked by like how little, and I look back at my own educational experience, it's like very rare that you would see those stories. And I'm wondering like if there should also be like a concurrent like effort to push those stories into the like what you would see as like the dominant school discourse, because I'm wondering like how is it that like I came up in my education not in a majority Black school, but it wasn't like completely racially homogenous, and I'm wondering like why we weren't reading biography of Malcolm X, why we were never reading stuff like Toni Morrison, and why it's only in situations where you see like, okay, this is an area for like just like this race, so now everybody's gonna read this, and now everybody over here is gonna read that. Like, I wonder if you could speak to that sort of question.
I mean, I think it's a combination of things, you know, it's an impressive teaching system. I went to an elite liberal arts school, which are nameless, where the entire curriculum for 4 years, there were no Black people. And when I wanted to write my thesis, I wanted to write about Dub poetry in Jamaica, and I was denied. This is at this institution that is regarded for its English literature program. So it's just the idea that any literature outside of the canon, for example, is not real literature is not valid. And I think that's a very pervasive attitude no matter where you go to school. I mean, even the school that I taught at, the autobiography of Malcolm X was not in the curriculum. And one of the reasons why I got to teach it was because nobody really cared about what was going to happen to those students, because they were already labeled students that were 9 times out of 10 not going to graduate from high school. And so I think it goes back to these kind of structures that say this is good literature, right? This is just very essentialized notions of what literature looks like, sounds like, what even poetry sounds like, right? A lot of people say, oh, are you a poet or are you a spoken word poet? I'm a poet, right? You better recognize. So it's just all how we use these categories and these genres to basically exclude people. So I think even you, no matter where you go to school, I mean, I think Toni Morrison should be in the curriculum. I don't care where you go to school. I don't care if you're in Idaho, you know? And the same goes for the autobiography of Malcolm X. Like, there is no reason why that shouldn't be in a curriculum. And also, it shouldn't be one book, you know? We're going to have one book for these people, and we're going to have one book for these other people, and then, you know, and that's usually how it's done. But how can it be infused in such a way where it doesn't seem like, wow, we're learning about Black people right now, or we're learning about people with disabilities right now on this very special day, you know? Or we're learning about, you know, people who like other people of the same gender. Like, why is that? Why are these put into these little boxes where we only talk about it at certain moments, or it's special if we do? And I think that goes back to larger institutional structures that want to promote, you know, this very kind of heteronormative, canonical, white, patriarchal way of thinking and learning and teaching.
I just did some work with another doctoral student about urban street fiction in the classroom, and our attitudes towards it. We wrote an article and we called it politely disregarding, because that's what usually happens. Oh, this is not me. And we know the larger discourse around that. We know the implications. We know what that means. You know, that means that this population that consumes and produces this work, they're not for me. They're actually contaminating society in some way. And so we have a lot of ideas around what certain texts have to offer. And we drew a parallel to slave narratives, right? So like when slave narratives were first produced, a lot of the country, those people, those hypersexual, violent people, no, that's not for us. We don't, they can write? No. And it's the same thing now. It's like scary, but we were like, oh my God, it's the same thing. They can write. They're hypersexual, they're violent. They're like 50 Cent wrote a book, what? It's the same thing, the same attitude. They're like, oh no, that's not for me. And what happens is we turn a deaf ear to a whole cross-section of our population. We just turn a deaf ear to our population, and it affects all of us. And usually we feel like it affects, we need it for the students of color, but everybody. Once you deny, when you don't listen, when you don't hear so much of the population, it's dehumanizing for those people, but it's also dehumanizing for the people that are closing their minds off. And so that's very problematic. So I think, yes, both need to work in combination with each other.
Yeah, because just to respond, like, I think it's shocking to me that in any school that I could, for example, like I could go through my entire like school life never having, that anybody could go through their entire school life never having read a book with like the main character being a black main character. You know, I mean, I remember, and I think it's politically different depending on where you are, but I probably read like 5 or 6 books about the Holocaust when I was in high school, you know, not being Jewish, and yet, for, you know, the whole time that you're there, and then people wonder like why, you know, why are, it just seems like so obvious that like that imbalance within education would translate into like larger social imbalances.
Dr. Wallace is giving us the look.
If you did patient, great audience. So, yeah.
So, thank you so much.